must know that I'm in the dog fight with him. I'm next to him side by side. We have a bond that's unbreakable. I'm gonna show you the good, the bad, the beautiful, and the ugly. Transparency is everything. When I learn, you learn. Nate, you like that, don't you?
I was about to say that's a really cool intro.
I know, I told you. Shout out to my guy, Miles Myers, for hooking that up. He does a really, really good job. So I couldn't listen. The real magic happens behind the camera. I'm just the talking head in front of the camera, right? I want to say, first of all, happy Monday to everybody and to you too. And I want to say also that it is my pleasure and honor. I've been watching this, I would say young man, right? Young man. I've been watching this young man for a long time. Everything you put out is informative but entertaining, and I absorb all of it. You can never learn enough in this dog subculture. And I want to introduce to the show Nate Schoemer, Nathaniel Schoemer. And Nate, I want you to tell the people, our audience, and I know we're streaming live on your platform too, but for our audience, for the people who don't know who you are, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, definitely. And I appreciate that. I think an introduction is important because people have to know why should they listen to the things that we have to say. So I'll give a quick background on my dog training experience. When I first became interested in dog training, one of my good friends, who is in fact the person who got me into dog training, he had a dog training facility in Chicago called Dog Style Incorporated. He invited me to come down. I spent 3 weeks at his facility. And at the time I was doing post-production in Los Angeles after getting out of the Marine Corps. And that just really wasn't for me, sitting behind a computer all day, especially after being infantry, machine gunner, martial art instructor, combat swim instructor. I was used to being active. So sitting behind a computer just wasn't cutting it. And I spent 3 weeks at his facility, and I was really fascinated by what he was able to do with the dogs. And one day he said, you know, we're not getting any younger. If you're really interested in dog training, you should go for it. And so I asked him where the best schools were where I can jump on the fast track to learn about dog training rather quickly. And he told me about Michael Ellis and Tom Rose. And so I looked into both schools, and the Tom Rose school at the time accepted the GI Bill. So that's the one that I went to. So I went to the Tom Rose School. I did their professional program, master's program, graduated top of the class in both of them. One guy beat me, which he's a phenomenal trainer, so I'm not too upset about that. He ended up going out and winning nationals and PSA. Pretty much every competition this guy has been on, he's won. I remember he took second place once, and everyone's like, Walter, what's going on? Why'd you take second place? Like, that's how good this guy is. Yeah. Then I was invited back. I started a company in California called Orion Canine Academy. I don't know what it was about that name, but it attracted a lot of people because I think the name does make a big difference when it comes to setting up a new dog training business. And I had a 2-month wait list. Everything was going great. And then Tom Rose invited me to come back to be an instructor. So I went back as an instructor, and I worked directly under Dave Van Garderen, who's now the head instructor at Kennelwood Academy. And if you don't know about Dave, he is an amazing trainer. He won nationals in IGP, competed at Worlds. I mean, really top class, not only trainer, but really good instructor. Right. So he became a mentor for me. And he was also a protection specialist, does a lot of work in protection training, which I know you're familiar with. And he was always on me. He's like, grab that dog. Let's work. Let's work. When the students would be at lunch, him and I would be doing dogs and protection work. After that, I went to Colorado, set up a dog training business out there for a while. Then went back to California and primarily focused on stay and train. So I did stay and trains pretty much solo for about 8 years. And I would have anywhere from 5 dogs at the lowest to around 15. And the most I had at one time was 17. Working all those dogs by myself. I was a one-man team. So dealing with the dogs, dealing with the clients, doing the lessons, I was pretty much working nonstop, and it was exhausting, but it gave me a lot of experience. And one of the things I often think about, because I check out my competitors. So I look at other dog trainer websites, and I see websites where these dog trainers are claiming to have trained 10,000 dogs. And in my head, I'm thinking, have you done the math?
You're right.
Like, there's no way you've trained 10,000 dogs unless they mean 10,000 indirectly, And if that's the case, you and I have trained hundreds of thousands indirectly from helping people and influencing them online. So I don't count that. I count hands-on, me working with the dog, training them from start to finish. And I did the math, and I think it was close to like 300 that I've trained. And that was, again, nonstop all day, every day. So it gave me a really massive frame of reference, which I think is very valuable for a dog trainer. And then, of course, continued education. I read constantly. I'm a massive fan. Everyone knows I'm a massive fan of Michael Ellis. I think he's had the greatest influence on my career indirectly because I studied all his content obsessively. I have his membership. I listen to it on the regular. As we were talking about before starting, I think he's the GOAT when it comes to teaching people how to be professional dog trainers. Very articulate, very intelligent, and very respectful and professional in the industry. And his work speaks for himself. And then studying Nino, I think Nino is a phenomenal tactician, incredible dog trainer. And doing his MVP course really kind of lit the fire and the passion for dog training. Yeah, he's awesome. Big fan of his work and him in general. I've been lucky enough to have all these incredible dog trainers on my podcast as well, to be able to talk to them and learn more from their experiences. Training in protection clubs. I was in a few PSA clubs. I was in French ring clubs for about 3 years. Never competed in these, but I didn't care to compete. I just loved the training. I loved getting into the bite suit. I had one trainer that I worked with in French ring, and I was really fortunate to be able to train under him because he always had like dozens of dogs. So every day I was catching multiple dogs, not every day, 3 times a week is how often we trained. And then I had the show on Animal Planet, Rescue Dog to Super Dog, which was an incredible experience, being able to find these dogs in shelters in LA and then training them to be service dogs. Not all of them made it. So we had 12, and I think 8 of them ended up continuing to work as service dogs. The other ones kind of dropped out in a sense. Not every dog can be a service dog, as you know. And then, of course, I've been making videos online, trying to educate people the best that I can with the knowledge that I know and the experience that I have to hopefully improve the lives of all dogs by educating those that care for them. That's it in a nutshell.
You know what? That makes me think that there's a lot of things that I think that unfortunately we couldn't hit on all of them in this particular podcast, but the imperative things that I like to touch that are really affecting a lot of people and affecting good bred dogs is like every time I see a dog that is being displayed in movies or a lot online, like the Belgian Malinois, it seems like everybody and their grandmother has one now, right? Now, my question is to you is, as a professional dog trainer, have you seen a proverbial shift from where Connie Corsos used to be 20 years ago to now they're like buying Frenchies now to wrong owners? And what are you seeing as far as the breed's temperament versus is this breed right for the person's household? You know, I think there's a huge conflict where people are buying dogs because they're trendy, not knowing what the dog was specifically designed for. Are you finding that this is becoming more of a problem, which now enables more good dogs going to the pound? I mean, because there's a lot of rescues going on right now. You know, a lot of purebred rescues, a lot of Doberman rescues. Got one in Sun Valley, Doberman Rescue. And I think people have the misconception that these dogs are going to be lap dogs. Oh, these dogs are going to be great. I want something because it looks nice. What have you seen an uptick in the breed and what the issues are, why the shelters have increased an influx of certain type of dog breeds?
Yeah, I think this is something that's probably been going on since before you and I were even born. I mean, anytime that Hollywood or the media highlights a specific breed. So I started doing some research on this when the movie Max was coming out, because Max was the first big one that was highlighting the Malinois, and they call it the 101 Dalmatian syndrome. And anytime Hollywood highlights a specific breed, it increases the popularity of that breed up to 10 years and sometimes more. And as you said, Hollywood has been using the Malinois in a lot of movies, even in historical movies where the Malinois wouldn't even have been present in the environment. at the time in which the movie was taking place. John Wick is a big one where they had the Malinois. And then people, as you said, they go out and they want to get something that's trendy. Now, if someone goes out and they see the Malinois and they think it looks really cool, but they're also invested, they want to do it the right way for the dog and to give the dog the experience and the quality of life that they think the dog deserves, then they can be great. Like, you don't have to be a professional dog trainer to own a Malinois, but you have to understand what you're getting into. And this is the same with any breed. But unfortunately, for professional dog trainers, we're usually dealing with the problem after the owner already has the dog. If people would take the time to research the breed that would better fit their lifestyle, then of course we would have way less of these problems. But yeah, I mean, there was way more Malinois that were seen in shelters, and you would never see that before. When I was doing the show Rescue Dog to Super Dog, we spent 3 months every single day going to every shelter in LA and looking at all the dogs to try to find those dogs for the show. And before these movies started highlighting, specifically talking about the Malinois, you wouldn't see them in shelters. And there's a lot of trainers that have been in the game much longer than I have, where they even talk about, like, you wouldn't see Malinois unless it was a canine unit with the police department or another dog trainer competing in one of these protection sports. Besides that, you wouldn't see them. They'd be like unicorns. But now they're everywhere. And yes, that's a problem. It could be good, but it could also be very bad. Here in the United States, we're usually really good at messing up dog breeds.
Yes. And, California has passed some new laws that is that's probably going to change the breeding makeup in general. But, I want to talk about old school versus new school dog training. And I always tell people, I'm not a dog trainer. I've been a part of dog clubs for 17 years now, but I should have learned something being a part of these clubs. As a matter of fact, that movie Max, the guy who I used to train under, OJ, was a part of that movie. And
I'm familiar with him. Yep, we've trained together.
Yes. So this leads me to believe every time I talk to a new Dobie owner or a new pet owner, they tend to think that they can get all the education off of YouTube University, right? And I always say that I'm an old school guy. I'm a Generation X guy. I'm a hands-on individual. I need to learn with my hands. Now, when you take these classes from STS, he's a hell of a trainer, you have to buy them, of course, online because he's somewhere in the UK, somewhere out there, 9 hours flight from us. But in reality, I really think that the online training should be geared towards people who've already had a foundation in dog handling or pet ownership. Do you think that it is more educational for new pet owners to learn how to handle their dog in person versus going online and buying a couple of courses?
I think it's going to depend quite a bit on the individual. I mean, based on all the dog trainers that I've helped train or that I've mentored, a common trend that I see when it comes to separating the ones that end up doing really well and being quite excellent at the skill of training dogs is the time that they put into actually training, handling, and working with dogs, kind of going back to what you were saying. But I've also met trainers where they did learn on YouTube University. They studied everything they could because they didn't have much of a budget. They were, rather broke at the time, but they wanted to learn how to train. And so they studied as much as they can. They watched everything, and then they put it into practice every day. Now, something that I often bring up, and this is how they would teach in the military, this is why I'm familiar with this, but Bloom's cognitive taxonomy and the way in which the human mind learns. So the way that I learned it, if you look it up now, it's kind of written in a different way from how I learned it. But the way that I learned it was the bottom base. So if you look at a pyramid, it's the knowledge, it's the data, it's the information that we're collecting. So we're getting a bunch of information, but we fully don't understand what it is that we're learning. And this was really big in the Marine Corps. As I said, I was a drill instructor. And when I was going through drill instructor school, studying the SOP, the standard operating procedure, I didn't have anywhere to put the information. I just had to memorize it. But then after being a drill instructor for a year or so, and then going back and restudying that SOP, everything made sense because I've been putting into practice. So we have the data, which is supposed to satisfy the left hemisphere of the brain. And then we start doing application where we take the things that we learned and we start putting it into practice. And then above that, we get the comprehension, what he would call that aha moment, where everything starts to click. And I think that's a big part of dog training. And something that I often say is, structure or consistency and structure, flexibility and execution. And so what that means is there's a structure. People often say dog trainer is not cookie cutter. And I can agree with that. No, it's not cookie cutter, but there are a lot of things that I do exactly the same with every single dog. The things that I change are based on the dog that I'm working with. And that's another quote that gets thrown around and people like it. They don't like it. Train the dog in front of you. And to me, train the dog in front of me means what are the goals for that dog based on what the owner wants? How does this dog learn? How motivated is this dog for food, toy, affection, for running around the field? What can I use to drive the behavior? And then how can I put the dog through the steps in order to get the results that's not only going to be effective, but it's going to be something the dog enjoys for the process, right? Some dogs I might have to do a higher rate of reinforcement. The dog has a lower attention span. Maybe they have ADHD like I do. So I need to give them more treats at a faster rate in the beginning. And then maybe when I start fading it, some dogs I have to fade more quickly. Some dogs I have to fade more slowly. But we're still doing the same thing with each dog that we work with. And speaking of ADHD, I don't remember the question.
Yeah.
What was I answering? What was the question? Sorry, I started going in a different direction, so I don't remember what the initial question was.
No, you answered it. You nailed it, because the question was, do you think it was like, do we think online training is
oh, that's right. Yeah.
You almost had me like, what? But
exactly right. So, yeah, it's about putting into practice, though. Sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
That's okay. So that leads me another good question. Now, a lot of people like me who are busy throughout the day, and our time is spent with family members or even working on the weekends. We don't have the luxury to go to Nate Schoemer 3 days a week in person, right?
Right.
Or we don't have time for you to come to the house because we're not home. We out working. What I've noticed in the past with a few, I'm not going to say a few people, a lot of people, they would pay for I think you call it something, but I call it board and train. You call it
stay and train, board and train, doggy boot camp, in kennel training. Yeah.
Right. So when somebody does and this is for the layman's out there too, in regards to this question, because they really don't know, but when you're doing a stay and train, what are your requirements for the owner during that whole process? Because I preface it by saying this. A lot of times, even I did back in the day, I thought that once the dog is done being trained, that I get this remote control and I speak French to my dogs, couche.
Yeah.
OPA. And it's not doing nothing. And then you come and do the demonstration in front of me. There's eye contact. There's a sense of authority, and the attention is there. So what do you require a stay and train, or what do you recommend a stay and train client to do during that process, whether it's 2 or 3 months?
Yeah, and everyone does stay and train slightly different. And so I can kind of take you through my evolution of stay and trains and how I've done them, because I've changed them over the years. But one of the things when it comes to a stay and train, and this is what I tell clients that are interested in doing a stay and train, I usually push lessons on people. I would rather teach them everything they need to know, have them put it into practice, because in the long run, I think the dog's going to end up being better, and they're going to be able to use those skills on future dogs. They can help friends. And kind of what we were talking about before we started, we often put the title of dog trainer on a pedestal, where I think most people can train dogs. I think if most people take the time, they're patient, and they're willing to make mistakes and to persevere through that, most people could train their dogs. It's something that Tom Rose would say. He would say, even if you're not good at delivering rewards, even if your timing kind of sucks, but if you're consistent, your dog will learn. And what I tell my clients that are interested in stay and trains, I say, what I'm doing for you is I'm simply doing the reps. This is something that's really different. I know you're a fitness guy, as I am. I've been working out since I was 12. It's kind of crazy to think how many years I've been working out now. But I got certified as a personal trainer, never ended up doing it professionally. But one of the differences there is I can't take my client's body and do the reps for them. They have to go in the gym. They have to do the reps. That's the only difference. I'm doing the reps, so the dog is going to be able to do the movements mechanically. I'm going to get the dog to go into heel, to go into down, stand, to follow the physical cues. A big part of what I teach is my communication system. So I teach every dog that I work with markers, and the way that I define a marker, because this is a word that we throw around quite a bit, I define it as a word or sound that predicts any one of the 4 quadrants of opera conditioning, which is, of course, the positive and negative reinforcement, positive and negative punishment. And we know that the closer the consequence, good or bad, is to the behavior, the stronger the connection. So the marker acts as that bridge between the behavior and the consequence. Again, good or bad. So I teach the dog the markers. I do engagement. I build a relationship with every dog that I work with. I teach every dog how to follow a food lure, and I teach every dog how to follow a leash cue, yielding to the leash pressure. Because when I have those things in place, it unlocks the 3 key events, what I like to call the 3 key events to dog training, which is the reward event, reinforcement event, and the correction event. So reward event is when we reward the dog. Reinforcement event is when we want the dog to perform an action. And correction event, if we are going to use a correction, is when the dog is going to experience some kind of punishment, whether it's negative punishment, positive punishment, or a combination of the two. So by me going through and I'm doing the reps with the dog in a neutral environment, I'm getting the dog to understand it. Then I'm gradually increasing the difficulty of the environment. So then when the owner comes back, the reps have already been done. Now they just have to go through it with the dog to make sure that the dog understands that the rules that they learned with me now apply with their human, the one that originally may not have had a good structure or rules. And I like to do a lesson every weekend that I'm doing a stay and train if the client has the time to do that. Now, I used to think that I couldn't do it, especially on the first weekend. I'm like, the dog doesn't really know anything yet.
Right.
I've got some of the communication system down. I'm building a relationship, but the dog's not performing on verbal command at this point. But what I do now is I'm showing them the physical skills that they need. Why is it that if you go on good dog trainer YouTube channels and you look at videos where they're working with dogs, I can almost guarantee in many of these videos, someone in the comments has said, oh, it would be nice if you used an untrained dog. It's like the dog is untrained, but it looks like the dog is trained because the handler is so skilled and so talented. Now, I think I'm a pretty good handler, pretty good trainer. I'm not the greatest out there, but right. I take dogs from clients that I'm working with. I show them, and then I hand it back, and they're like, oh, you make it look so easy. Well, I've just done it with hundreds of dogs multiple times, so I know how to move in a way that can capture the dog. And talking about people learning from home, I'm a true believer in champion study game footage. I can't tell you how many times I recorded myself training and then looked back and watched the video before I post it, and I can see so many mistakes. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to post it anyways because we all make mistakes. No one's going to do it perfectly. And one of the biggest ones is overshadowing. If you're familiar with that term, I often call it pairing. And it's one of the biggest mistakes that we all make across the board. I don't care how long you've been training. You're going to pair a physical with a verbal at some point because that's the way that we communicate. But if you film yourself and you know what to look for, which is that next level on the Bloom's cognitive taxonomy, which is analysis, and that's where I think every dog trainer should be. I should be able to watch you working with your dog, and I should be able to see what some of the issues are. Like I did a seminar recently where this trainer that was working with their dog, I kept having to point out the leash because when they were trying to lure the dog, they were applying pressure with the leash unknowingly, and the dog was on a prong collar, so that created confusion for the dog, and the dog was backing up around him and wouldn't follow the lure. And of course, I could point that out in real time, but if they filmed it and they watched it, they would be like, oh my gosh, look what I'm doing there. The leash was throwing the dog off. I was creating confusion, which on the surface appeared like the dog was stubborn, but it was something that they didn't see while they were working with the dog. So to answer your question, though, again, ADHD, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I like to work with them each weekend. I give them videos that they can reference from my YouTube channel. I give them access to my course on Sit, Stay, Learn. And then I also give them basically, like I have this manual I'm currently working on right now, an updated one from my original. And now I'll give that out, even though it's not done. I let them know it's a rough draft, so don't be too judgmental. But it covers learning theory, which I'm really big on learning theory. I think it's so important to know how dogs learn. And talking about the subject of this was, old school versus new school. Well, one of the big things is I think that we care more now about what's going on in the dog's brain. How is the dog responding to the training on an emotional level? Whereas before it was like, it doesn't matter. Get the dog to do the behavior. Who cares about their emotions? We make them do it, and that's the end of it. Now, of course, there's a lot more to it because it can be pretty complex. Even traditional style dog training, if you're going to do it well, it still involves rewards. It still involves reading the dog and being able to act in a timely manner to get the behavior that you want. A quick example. So I like to give examples instead of just saying things and people don't know exactly what I'm talking about. A very traditional style technique for training is giving the dog the command and then correcting them into the position. So an example I often use is sit. So we say sit, and I'm not talking about negative reinforcement here because I've had people tell me, because I've talked about this on live before, and they said, I think you're confused. I think you're talking about negative reinforcement. I'm like, no, I'm not confused because I've studied this quite a bit. So, and it makes sense why they would think it's negative reinforcement. So I'm not talking about pressure, because if I tell a dog to sit and then I take the leash and I pull up on the leash, let's assume the dog's in heel position, and I apply pressure and I keep that pressure there until the dog sits, and then I turn off the pressure. Okay, that's escape training. The dog is escaping the pressure. They're turning off the pressure by complying. Okay, what behavior gets reinforced? The behavior of sitting. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. And this took me a while to figure out. So a traditional technique would be you say sit, and then you literally pop the leash up and push on the dog's butt hard and fast so the dog doesn't even realize that you say sit and the dog's like, boom, forced into the sit position. Now, a trainer that's using this, if they were skilled in using this technique, once the dog's in position, they're marking that behavior. They're jumping into a big reward event, and the dog doesn't even realize what happened. I still don't think it's fair, because what we're essentially doing is we're using positive punishment in that scenario. And then you think to yourself, well, positive punishment prevents the repeat of the behavior. How are you using it to teach a behavior? This doesn't make sense with the science. Well, what we're doing is we're punishing the dog before they even know how to comply to the behavior. So you're being punished for not responding to sit, even though you don't know how to respond to sit yet. Well, what happens is you get really, really fast results. Not only does the dog learn fast, but they're motivated to do it fast, but not as one of the greatest trainers out there, Ivan Balabanov, calls healthy motivation. This isn't healthy motivation because the dog's like, whoa, don't correct me. But they are doing it fast, and it does become pretty reliable. That's why it's stuck, I think, for so long, and not really thinking so much about how the dog is dealing with it on an emotional level, how much stress is associated with that. And I talked about this earlier. I told you I was talking to Joel Silverman, and there's this book I'm reading right now. I believe it's called Inside of a Dog. And so it's how the dog perceives the world, written by Alexandra. I don't remember her last name, but she's talking about a study. And I found this really interesting. I'm going to try to say very quickly. There's two groups, and they're trying to see if we can define a behavior that a rat would be doing based on the rat being optimistic or pessimistic. Like, can we use that to define? Well, how can we define that? Well, through the animal's behavior. So in this case, what they did was they had two groups. So group A was in a very inconsistent environment. So the lights were on and off at random time. The temperatures fluctuated randomly. The food schedule was very random. They didn't know when they were going to eat, when they were supposed to sleep. So very stressful environment for these rats. And then group B, it was very structured, very consistent. They knew when they were going to eat. They knew how they were going to play with the other rats, all the things that they need to be satisfied in life. So then they had each group separately. Group A, there was a tone that went off that signaled to them to press a lever. And when they pressed the lever, it would dispense food. And then they had another sound that would go off. And if they pressed the lever when that sound went off, there was no food, but an unpleasant sound as a consequence. They had Group B go through the same thing. Now, both Group A and Group B did the same thing in that experiment. They hit the first one, they got the food. They hit the second one, unpleasant sound. They stopped hitting the second one, but they continued to hit the first one. Then they brought each group back. Now, Group A, remember, Group A is the one that had the inconsistent, unpleasant environment, you could say. A new sound went off that was in between sound 1 and sound 2. So it was right in between as far as the way it sounded. And Group A, they did not go press the lever with the new sound. Group B did. And not only did they go press the lever, but they did it with enthusiasm, as if they were to say, let's see what this one does. And it goes back to the environment, what we build. And this is what trainers often call management. How do we manage the dogs outside of training? And are we given the things that are biologically appropriate for the dogs? What we often refer to as biologically appropriate outlets, things you do with your dogs. We give bite games for the biters, nose games for the sniffers, retrieve games for the retrievers, these outlets that they need so we can ask for neutrality in other areas. But by having this proper environment and spending the time building a relationship, getting them comfortable, getting them to trust you, not only do we end up getting better results in the long run, but they're more enthusiastic about it. They enjoy the process. And of course, I think it's fair to say most people really love their dogs and they want the best for their dog. So how can I get my dog to listen, but also do it in a way that's not only effective, but fun and enjoyable? And I think that's where new dog training continues to lean more towards those that really want to get the best for the dog. How can we look at our dogs and say, what can I do to create the absolute best environment for you based on my resources? And then that goes back to talking about getting the right breed.
That's actually a good point you made, because a lot of the old school trainers that I've known in the past, not all, but some, they didn't believe in using treats. They believed in praise, a lot of praise. And with a lot of praise, you're going to have to, like Oscar told me, he had Oscar Moore, shout out to Oscar Moore, Elevated Canine. He had he had a protection seminar, him and Chris Sykes. This was last year. And I paid for the package to be involved and not just a spectator, because I wanted the full experience. And he said, Gerald, he said, when the dog does something well, you say voila. When the dog sits, you say voila. When the dog says this, you say voila. You always voila, right? And I was saying voila, like voila. He said, Gerald, first of all, you don't have to say voila all the time. He said, also, it's the tonality. He says, the tone in which you give your dog commands or praise them. If you always up here with the tone, then he gets used to that. So when you really need him to listen to you, he's used to hearing the same tone, but you're going to scream louder than before. And so my question to you is that when I went to that seminar, I took something from there that I'm going to always incorporate in me training my puppies or adults dogs. But I never used the clicker up until recently. And Al Benuelos, who now helps trains my dogs for IGP, they changed the name again, IGP. He got me start using the clicker. So my question to you is, how important, or how much do you think, how important is the clicker?
I think clickers are great. Now, I don't use clickers. Sorry, go ahead. It looks like I lost you there for a moment. All right, you're back. So I think clickers are great. There's two main reasons why clickers tend to be very useful and effective, especially for people starting out. Is number one, it's incredibly consistent. The sound is always the same. The problem with our voice is that we often change the rise and inflection based on our emotions in the moment. If my dog does something that I've really been struggling on, my yes marker might turn into a yes, yay. Now, of course, in that moment, the dog's still going to know it's a good thing, they're really good at reading our emotional state. They can smell it. But the click is very consistent, so it becomes easier for a lot of people to get the dog classically conditioned to it. Now, of course, classical conditioning is not binary. It's on a spectrum, like how conditioned is the dog. That's why we often use that battery analogy, or we're charging up the battery. And then the other reason why is it's much easier to separate two physicals than it is to separate a physical and a verbal. So it's much easier for people to click reward. It's much harder for people to go, yes, reward. Putting that pause is very, very difficult and takes a lot of practice. So consistency, separating, and transferability, being able to transfer it over. So there's a lot of dog trainers that I've worked with in the past where when they're training dogs in board and train, stay and train, they primarily use the clicker because that's very easy to hand off to the owner. Now, a lot of them will do multiple markers. And this is something, when I first started to learn more about markers, I became very excited because when I first learned a marker, I just learned one single marker, and that marker was for a reward. That was it. I didn't learn any other markers. So when I started to learn more about markers, I became very excited to share that information with trainers that I've been training with. And I remember I went up to this one trainer and I started to tell him, I'm like, I got a marker that lets the dog know they're released and they're going to get a reward. I got one that says the dog can go get the reward. I got one that the dog can come to me. I have one that lets the dog know that. And I'm telling him all these markers. And he says, that's way too many markers. You're going to confuse the heck out of the dog. And now that was a very pessimistic perspective from this trainer.
Right.
Dogs can learn on average, I think most dogs between 150 and like 200 words, something like that. Don't quote me on it, but it's a significant number, especially when we're looking at the more intelligent breeds. I think the border collie that learned like 600 words or something like that. So 5 markers is not going to confuse the dog. In fact, I've had clients in the past where they taught the dog separate markers for each person, just so they can distinguish the difference between each person. Not like that's necessary, but the dog can learn it. It's not going to confuse the dog. It's not going to throw them off. They can learn multiple ones. I think it was because they each wanted to train the dog themselves. So they each wanted to go through the entire process and learn it all. So I don't want this person's conditioning to affect mine at all. Because even if you teach a dog that yes means a reward and you say it pretty consistently, and I come in and I say it close to how you say it, the dog's still going to perk up. They're still going to be like, oh, that sounds like something. You've probably seen some of these videos on Instagram or TikTok where someone's talking in the phone, but they're playing a trick on their dog. And they're like, yeah, we're going to go for a car ride and then maybe get a treat. And then, and the dog's turning their head and like, these are all very familiar words.
Yeah.
But the dog didn't have any problem learning multiple markers. And something else I was thinking about when you were talking was the main different types of methods in dog training. So, and this is something that's often debated. The 2 that stand out the most is going to be your force-free, pure positive, and the balanced. And then you have alpha dominance theory, and then what I would call traditional. So traditional, now if we think about those 4 quadrants, and I really like to be specific with things so we know what we're talking about. I think something that often happens is people will use words or say things and I may mean it one way, but then you collect the information and you interpret it a completely different way. Something that I've been talking about more recently is the word aversive. I've been hearing this quite a bit in the dog training world. And I started asking dog trainers, I said, what do you mean when you say aversive? And they all started giving me different definitions of what they meant when they said aversive. And so I looked it up, and the definition is a strong dislike. And often certain techniques are put into buckets like, oh, leash pressure is an aversive. No, it's not. It's dependent on how it's taught to the dog. How does the dog perceive it? If I teach the dog that leash pressure leads to a reward event, well, now leash pressure is a signal for a behavior that leads to a reward. That's not aversive at all. Now, if I force the dog into a position when the dog wants to do something else, now that can be aversive. It is going to be a great dislike. So if we look at traditional, I would say with most traditional trainers, they're using all 4 quadrants of opera conditioning. And just for those that may not be familiar with this terminology, I know you are, and a lot of people listening are, so bear with me because there are some people that don't. So we have the positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment. People get confused on this terminology because we often think positive is good, negative is bad. But positive is adding, negative is taking away. The adding and the taking away always happens after the behavior. This is very important. So if I apply pressure and the dog complies and I turn the pressure off, because the pressure was turned off after the behavior, it's negative reinforcement. And that throws people off because they say, well, didn't you add something? So wouldn't it be positive? And then we know reinforcement means encouraging the repeat of the behavior. Punishment means preventing the repeat of the behavior. So positive reinforcement, anything I give to a dog that adds value. Good dog. If the dog likes it, that's positive reinforcement. Petting the dog, giving the dog a treat, playing with the dog, letting the dog run in an open field. These are all forms of positive reinforcement. Right. Negative reinforcement, we apply some kind of pressure. The dog complies. We turn off that pressure. It doesn't have to be physical. People often think it has to be physical. If I'm using spatial pressure to get a dog to back up and the dog backs up and I stop my forward movement, that's negative reinforcement. Leash pressure, perfect example. Low-level stim on the remote collar, tone on the remote collar. There's multiple forms of negative reinforcement. The common human analogy we use is the beeping in the car to buckle your seatbelt. Positive punishment is anything we add to prevent the repeat of the behavior. Again, doesn't have to be physical, but it can be. So old school technique, hitting a dog with a newspaper, positive punishment. Leash pop, positive punishment. A correction level stim on a remote collar, positive punishment. Yelling at a dog, positive punishment. Negative punishment, anytime we take something of value away. Now, with negative punishment, the dog doesn't have to have possession of the item that we take away. It's whether or not the dog believes they're going to get something and we take it away. That could be negative punishment. A good example, I'm working on a stay. I go to reward the dog for maintaining the position. I did not release the dog. The dog breaks the position. Now you don't get the reward. The dog didn't have the reward, but believing that the dog was going to get the reward and then taking it away, negative punishment. So we have positive reinforcement, positive punishment, negative reinforcement, negative punishment. So we hit all of them. Now, the order in which these are implemented is very much often dependent on the method or the style. And I'm speaking in a very generalized way, so we can be clear there. But I would say most traditional style training, they start with positive punishment and positive reinforcement. If I'm correcting the dog into each position, down, and I correct the dog into the down. Again, I'm not using pressure. I'm literally punishing the dog for non-compliancy to a command that the dog doesn't understand to perform a behavior yet for. And I have the dog do all the positions and I reward the dog after. Very common. And negative punishment. Now, I've worked with a lot of traditional trainers that did not use any form of negative reinforcement intentionally, meaning like leash pressure, but they probably use things like spatial pressure. I saw something pop up. Was there a question?
No, they were just saying good information. Good information. It was just he was saying good information. I appreciate this. Yeah. Very good
thank you. Yeah. And so that's primarily traditional. Again, I'm super simplifying this. And then when we look at pure positive trainers, they're mostly focused on positive reinforcement and negative punishment. How can I get the dog to do things that I want without using any sort of physical inputs? I want it to be food, toy, affection, and withholding if they make a mistake. Balanced trainers, for the most part, will start the same way pure positive trainers start. We're going to teach everything with rewards. We're going to shape behaviors. We're going to train in isolation. So I'm going to teach the dog the communication system. I'm going to get them invested. Then I'm going to gradually make the environment more difficult. And when they've reached a point of proficiency, then we start adding more pressure and corrections. So good balanced dog trainers try to do it in a way that's absolutely fair to the dog. We want the best for the dog, but we also want the overall quality of the dog's life to be good. So for me, like I use remote training collars. Now, there's a lot of good and bad online about remote collars. If you never used one and the first piece of social media you were presented with was someone taking a remote collar and smashing it over a rock, then you might think, oh, shock collars are really bad. The problem with them is that they are very complex. They seem simple on the surface, but the way the dog interprets it, if we do it the wrong way, we can create issues. But if we do it the right way, it gives our dogs that ultimate level of freedom, at least the best we can possibly provide. There's no such thing, and I've said this in the past, so I'm actually correcting things I've said wrong in the past, where I said remote collar is the only way to have 100% true reliability off leash. Not true, but 99% reliability, 99.9% reliability. And I call it my safety net. If I want to take my dog off leash and I want to be responsible, I don't want to have to constantly use the remote. But if my dog takes off for whatever reason, because I can't show my dog every single possible thing that's going to happen in the environment when I take my dog out in the world. I can simulate as much as possible, but there might be something that happens I'm not ready for, my dog's not ready for, and the emotional state is driving the dog's behavior, and they take off. I can probably stop them with the remote collar. But if I didn't have that, now my dog takes off. So then it's like, okay, well, if I'm not willing to do that, but I still want to give my dog freedom, then the best way to do that, the next best way, is a long line. But you have to have some way to reach out and control that dog. One of my buddies who's a really good dog trainer, one of the issues when a new dog trainer starts out is the frame of reference is smaller. And as you train more dogs, your frame of reference gets bigger. And he's a really phenomenal trainer. I mean, I think very highly of him. And we were having a conversation and he was telling me how he had dogs, like clients' dogs, where they'd be off leash without a remote collar. And I said, you probably shouldn't be doing that. He says, they listen. I train them, and he trained them on a remote collar, but he got to the point where they didn't need it. And he's like, they don't need it. They listen. He sent me a video, and dogs are responding to everything. Again, he's a solid, really good dog trainer. And I said, it's okay until it's not. And when it's not, that's when it's going to be really, really shitty. So it's like we have this as a safety measure. Now, going back to the other method, so we have balanced. I kind of got on a tangent there, but then. And we have alpha dominance. So what is alpha dominance? This is the stuff you're going to see more from like Cesar Millan type training. So this is where we want to show the dog that we're the alpha. I wouldn't say I know a lot about it. I basically just what I've seen Cesar Millan on the Dog Whisperer and things like that. The problem that I see with that form of training is when people think of the word alpha and they think of dominating, a lot of people think aggression. Like I have to be aggressive to my dog. I have to make my dog submit to me. And this is something where more of the new school sort of training is like, I don't want the dog to submit to me. I want the dog to be on the same team. I want the dog to want to work with me. And then something else that's really important to point out, I thought of this based on something you said earlier, is the dog's perception. So when we think about those 4 quadrants, the only one that really doesn't matter by definition, what the dog's perception is negative reinforcement. Meaning, if I take a dog that's really sensitive and I do the technique where I do light leash pops. So I do light leash pops until the dog does the behavior, I stop the leash pops. But if I have a very sensitive dog, the dog might experience that as a very stressful experience. Now, I still turned off the pressure when the dog complied, so it's still technically negative reinforcement. But in the other ones, the dog's perception matters quite a bit. If I tell a dog, no, you don't get this, but the dog goes, I don't give a crap, the negative punishment doesn't work. If I take a dog that's a really strong, powerful dog and I do a leash pop and that dog's like, that was a tickle, it's not an effective correction, right? If I take a water hose and I spray a group of 20 dogs, there's going to be a certain percentage of those dogs that are going to tuck tail and run. And there's going to be another percentage, your Malinois, your high drive Dobermans and German Shepherds and whatnot. They're going to jump and bite at the water. Yes. So that dog, it's positive reinforcement. If I have a dog and I say, hey, do you want to work for this food or do you want to work for this toy? And they go, I have no interest in that food. I have no interest in that toy. And I don't care if you pet me. Then the positive reinforcement doesn't work. And that's why we have to build these tools in isolation when we're working with our dogs. Talking about those events that we were talking about earlier, the reward event, the reinforcement event, a lot of that hinges on how good the trainer is at building those events. I jokingly call it, you know, that movie that was really popular back in the day, 50 Shades of Gray. Yeah. So I define it as color. So the reward event to me is green. Well, there's 50 shades of green. You might have a really, really faded out green, not a really good reward event. Dog doesn't really care. They'll kind of take it, but they could take it or leave it. But then you have trainers that are so good at delivering the reward event, that green is as dark as it gets. And when that dog enters that reward event, that is that dog's crack cocaine. And that dog will do anything to get access to that reward event again. Same thing with the reinforcement event. If I'm really bad at luring or guiding the dog with the leash, I'm not very clear with these signals, then that's a very light blue. It's not very effective. But if I built these communication channels, and if we're using toys, I know trainers that will use toys as a form of luring to get the dog into position and then release them to get access to the toy. These trainers are very skilled at building those events. So then when they use those in the actual real world, they're significantly more effective. So I know your question was on clickers.
No, that's a good point. I mean, listen, all of this is good, informative information that we're all soaking in, including me.
Well, I appreciate you having me on because I'm usually the one interviewing people now. So I'm sitting listening. So I love talking.
Yes. Listen, I'm going to get to this one question that there's been a debate about it, but I want to ask you this question from my own personal experience. I had a dog that I'm going to say rescue, that I took back from a breeding that I did a year and a half ago. This was a Doberman. He was very high prey driven, and he had a lot of fight drive too. I'm a prong collar, herm springer all day long. I mean, and I do believe in a dog having an e-collar as a backup tool when I'm somewhere out in the open field, because at the end of the day, Nate, they're still animals. They're still animals. And I was doing some training with Al over here behind Granger over here in Compton, trying to get him ready for a sport. And I noticed that when I was doing a long down, I would walk 20 feet away from him, turn around, or he moved. So I picked him right back up and put him right back down. And I made a correction right then, so I wouldn't confuse him 5-10 minutes later. I turn around, I said, couché, I come back, turn around, he's moving again. And I'm like, wait a minute, we just did a hard correction on him, and he's not getting this. And I put him back down again. Al said, put him back. So I did it again. I went back, and 20 feet away, turned around, he moved halfway. I'll say, pick him up and put him back. Now he's got the live, he's on a live ring. He's not on a dead ring. He stiffened up at me. He looks at me. What happens about 5-6 seconds later? He attacks me. And I knew from that point that even though my go-to tool for dog behavior corrections is the prong collar, I noticed that some dogs don't do well because some dogs may shut down and some dogs may load up. I found out another tool to use that works just as good, but less. It causes discomfort, but it's a learning tool. It's called a slip. What is your views on prong collars for corrective behavior versus slip leads on corrective behavior? What is your perspective on that?
I can talk on this for quite a while too. Now, with that situation you're describing, I just want to be clear what happened. So you put the dog in the down, you walked away 20 feet, and you turned around and he was right next to you.
He moved.
And then so do you know what happened there? Now, what's interesting is there's some dogs that, depending on the dog's dogality, right, personality, some dogs will correct the human if they think what's happening to them is unfair. Now, this is something that I often teach is if we walk away and we're not watching the dog, when you turn around, because we know that we have roughly 1 to 2 seconds. Now, I used to hear people say 1.3. That's what I was originally taught. Oh, you have 1.3 seconds to influence a dog's behavior. And I repeated that for a long time. And then someone messaged me in one of my videos and they said, where's the literature that supports this 1.3 seconds? And I said, that's a really good question. And I started researching. I couldn't find nothing that supports that. No data, no studies, nothing. 1.3 just sounds fancy, but roughly between 1 to 2 seconds. So if you walk away and your dog breaks the position, if it takes more than 2 seconds for your dog to get to you and you turn around and then you punish the dog, you actually punish the dog for coming to you, not for breaking the stay. So what I would do in that situation is I turn around, oh, I made a mistake. I go, good dog for coming to me. I take the dog back. I put the dog back in the down. I walk away and I watch. And then the moment the dog breaks the position, that's when I can use the marker. No, if the dog's at the point of corrections, whether I'm using a remote collar or a prong collar, then the dog would receive the correction. And then depending on what the dog does after the correction, same thing when we're considering food. If I give a dog a piece of food, it's not whether or not the dog takes it. It's what they do after they receive it. Do they take it and go, and do they drop out of their mouth like they just kind of checked it out? Or do they engage back again? So after the correction, depending on what the dog does, will depend on what I do next. So the dog gets the correction. If the dog goes back into the position on their own after the correction, good dog. If not, then I'll assist them putting that back in the position. So now I mark the moment the dog was to break the position. So that could have been the issue there. Now, when he was moving a little bit, that could be different. This is also where I said, filming is really, really useful because I've caught myself making so many of these mistakes. Yeah. And then when I go back and watch it, I'm like palm to face, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. And that's one of the things about having more experience, and I'll go back to the prong collars, but I was thinking of past dogs that I worked with. And I was talking to a couple of my other friends that do podcasts like this, like yourself. And we were trying to think of interesting topics for the audience to listen to. What would be valuable for them? And we thought it would be really interesting to just talk about specific dogs that we worked with, cases that we had, and how we dealt with it. And I had this one dog that was a Labrador Retriever in LA. The owners got the lab. They did the research. They wanted a friendly, happy-go-lucky dog that they can take everywhere. Very active people. I want to take the dog to the coffee shop, to all the restaurants that allow dogs to be, where they have the bowls of food and water and stuff for the dog. And this dog was terrified of its own shadow. Now, what I did, and this was earlier on in my career, so what I did was I first got the dog to take food inside the house. Then I had the dog take food outside. And then I gradually made it more difficult. And it got to the point where the dog wasn't really taking the food anymore. And I was like, well, we're just going to keep doing this until you take food. So I took the dog back to the spot every day. And it took multiple days before the dog started taking food again. And it was only because it was so hungry where it's like, all right, I'll take the food, but everything in this world is a threat to me. And it got to the point where I did create the positive association to the food and the environment, and we were able to fix it. It was a lot of counter conditioning that I did. But looking back on it, when I think, what could I have done that could have made it better? I could have spent more time on building the rewards, more time on building the reinforcement before taking the dog out. I took the dog into the environment too soon. And it created more stress for the dog that they didn't need to experience because of my lack of experience. And that's something like we have a big responsibility when we're training dogs as professional trainers. I know you said you're not a professional trainer, but you're definitely a dog trainer. And that responsibility is to get the results, but to do it in a way that's best for the dog. Now, talking about the training tools, like as I was saying earlier, I think it's when someone is first getting into dog training, I think pure positive is the best way to start. Get good at rewards. Get good at getting the dog to want to do things. Get good at the timing. If you can do that, then adding pressure and corrections is much easier because your timing is going to be good. Because if you're off on your timing with corrections, that's where we create more issues. And it was something I saw a lot when I was teaching at the Tom Rose School because new students would make mistakes all the time. And it would create confusion. Like being off by a half second could throw a dog off depending on what you were working on. And I'll give you a quick example with that. I was helping the student with retrieval training, and the dog literally went to go grab the item. And for some reason he corrected at that exact moment because he thought the dog was going to do something different. And the moment he corrected the dog, I was like, oh no, because the dog was going to do what he wanted, but because the timing was off, it pushed his training back weeks because of that. So with a prong collar, I often will use prong collars for people that need to communicate with their dog, but they have a powerful dog. So if I have a big, powerful dog and I have that dog on a flat collar, if I want to manipulate that dog when that dog doesn't want to be manipulated. So I always teach things, as I said, in isolation. So I teach a dog how to follow a leash before I ever use it in the real world. So they know how to sit, walk forward, lay down, more advanced training, walk backwards, all kinds of stuff you can teach communicating with a leash. But just because a dog knows to follow the leash doesn't mean they're always going to do it. especially when there's something else that they want to do. So if I have a big, powerful dog and I'm trying to get that dog to do something when the dog prefers to do something else, and early stages of training where we haven't added any punishment, a prong collar reduces the amount of pounds per pressure needed to manipulate that dog. So now it's very easy. I can get the dog to do the same thing without having to apply additional pressure. And then when we do get to the point of adding corrections, it's significantly safer. Because if I do a leash pop hard enough on a flat collar or a choke chain or something like that, the best analogy I heard from this is like getting karate chopped in your throat. Yeah. Like that's not good. But if I do a leash pop on a prong collar, it doesn't have to be that hard. It's going to be significantly more effective and much safer, even though they look like medieval torture devices. Now, I don't use slip leads. I know I see lots of trainers using them. A lot of trainers swear by them. I never used them. And not that I'm saying they're good, bad. I basically use them just to transport dogs from one spot to the next. When I would help at like kennels and whatnot, okay, this dog has to move from kennel 10 to kennel 22. All right, I'm just going to throw a slip lead and move the dog over. Very simple and easy. I like to use, when I first start out, I use a martingale. I love the martingale collar because it can close, it can tighten, but it doesn't choke the dog. So when I'm teaching leash pressure, it prevents the dog from doing that famous turn and slip your head out technique that dogs somehow know how to do. You know, if the leash isn't on tight enough or the collar, they back their head up and they slip right out. And you're like, oh, uh-oh, off the dog goes. Martingale prevents that. So it's very helpful when I'm doing leash pressure work. And then also with the prong collar, sometimes if those prongs aren't put in the right way, they can end up popping off. So good common practice to have is to have that backup leash that's attached to the collar and the prong collar in the off chance that it does pop off, that they're able to keep the dog from running off. Again, especially in the early stages of training. But of course, if you understand dogs and it breaks off, if the dog does look like they're going to take off, you just run the other way. 9 out of 10 times, the dog's going to chase you.
That's right. Let me ask you this. This has been a very controversial topic for dog owners and sport dog owners as well. So I'm going to ask you this. Can a sport dog be a protection dog, or can a protection dog be a sport dog, or can both transition to each other?
I would say define each one, and then I can tell you whether or not they can do both, because people have different definitions for different things. Like, I don't think if you're saying a protection dog is going to be civil, like, will the dog actually bite someone? You're doing work with hidden sleeves, you're doing muzzle attacks, you're doing all these things, everything that you can possibly do to see whether or not the dog will actually bite in a real scenario. I think that could be a sport dog, but then it becomes more of a dangerous sport dog for decoys. I know certain decoys don't want to work with dogs that are civil, because when we do things like slip the sleeve, or we're trying to reward the dog, you know, you take off the jacket, run with the jacket, have your reward. A dog that's been trained more in defense, more as an actual fight, those dogs might drop the and of course you would know that before you're working with the dog, so you shouldn't make the mistake of slipping the sleeve. But a big problem is with anything that we do, we develop habits. And so if I have a habit where I'm in the zone, I'm working with a dog, and when a dog's at that point where I'm going to slip the sleeve and give the dog the reward, I may not be thinking about it in the moment I slip the sleeve and suddenly that dog's lunging at me. Now, of course, the person should be holding it. The dog could be on a back tie. There's lots of different variables to consider when we're talking about something like this. So I think it is a complex question, and it's going to come down to how difficult is the dog to work with now based on the decoys that you have access to. What are your goals in the sport work? I mean, it's probably better just to have one for each if that is your intentions. Yeah. Have your sport dog, have your protection dog. I think that would make it easier. I don't know if that's the best answer to the question. I'm not. Yeah,
it's subjective.
Sport dogs, so not actual protection dogs. I've done all sport.
Yeah, it's subjective, because I think the foundation when you're doing a sport, like case in point, I've done IPO. I think the foundation of that dog got him ready to where, whether it was a sleeve or whether it was or a hidden sleeve, the dog can engage into a sleeve, or he can engage into being civil without any gear. Somebody asked the question. He says,
I say that would depend on the dog too, for sure. And again, I wouldn't even say I'm an expert in protection work. I mean, I did it for about 5 years for fun.
Here's the question right here from Bakari. Hey, G, can you please ask him, what is the legacy he wants to leave behind, the mark he wants to leave in the dog world? That's a good question.
That's a deep question. I mean, I hope what I do, my time being here, is that whatever I produce and put out ends up making dog training better as a whole, because I think we are going to continue to get better. I mean, if you look back at the trainers that were working in the 70s, 80s, of course, trainers are going to be better now because they have more resources. They can learn from mistakes of the trainers in the past. And hopefully by putting out this information, talking about our mistakes, showing the things that have worked for us, it'll make that path significantly shorter, which means it'll get better and continue to get better. So that's what I hope that I leave behind, and something for my kids to be proud of.
Another question, last question. How is the weather in Indiana right now? Are you enjoying the sunshine?
Oh, yeah, beautiful sunshine. It's about, I think it's like 12 degrees right now.
What?
And yeah, and we have, it's about 7 inches, I think 7, 8 inches of snow. That's just basically frozen at this point.
I was complaining yesterday about 82 degrees here. I was complaining like it's hot as hell in this house. I'm like, whoo, turn the air on.
It's cold. Are there any other questions from people that are watching? I mean, I wouldn't mind answering a couple more if you don't mind.
We got a couple here.
I love answering questions from people that are watching, and everyone who is watching. Thank you, seriously, for taking the time.
Corey's listing saying thoughts on how a dog should come out at a trial training day, PSA or IGP.
I don't fully understand the question. Like when they're coming out and they're training, it says trial training day. So those are two different things, I would think, right? Like a trial is going to be a trial. Training day is you're just training with the club.
Right. Let me see here.
If they can clarify it a little bit better. Well, and again, I don't want to say I'm not an expert in the protection sports. Again, I did it for I did PSA for about 2 years, was certified as a PSA decoy, trained in French ring for about 3 years, but I never competed. So I want to make that clear. I did it for fun because I love the game.
You know, and I think when you're training for protection sport, it definitely builds structure, but it also builds a stronger bond with your dogs.
I can add something to that. If they're talking about actually competing. So from one of the greatest competitors that I've known in my life, Tom Rose, when he competed before he started his school, he would trial like 10 to 15 dogs. He would take these dogs and he would title all of them. He would take each one out one at a time. And what he always told the students, he said, do not step out onto that field unless you are certain the dog is going to pass. Don't go out there thinking they might mess up or there's going to be a mistake. Do not step out onto that field until you know the dog is going to pass. And he said, when I had that mentality, every time I stepped on the field, I walked away either with a pass or a trophy. And he's been on the podium multiple times. Oh, yeah. So I think that's good advice from someone who's walked the walk.
Yeah. Now, Bakari asked another question. Let me make sure it's kind of ambiguous and kind of vague. G, can you please ask them, as trainers, as a community, what can we do to improve and do better?
I think that's a good question. I think, something I've been seeing quite a bit, as we were talking earlier, I don't spend time on social media. I only go on there to post content for the business. And when I'm getting ready to post something, I pull up the page and of course there's going to be things that pop up right away. And I pretty much only follow dog stuff and jujitsu. So it's either going to be dogs or it's going to be jujitsu for the most part. And I've been seeing a lot where people are constantly bashing each other. If we really want to do well by the dog training community, we need to have an open mind. We need to see why techniques work, why they don't work. How can we improve and how can we be better instead of trying to bash other people's techniques and styles? Like, why is it that you choose not to use luring in your training? What can I learn from that to make my training better? Not, let me tell you how much you suck and how much better I am. That doesn't help anyone except feed the Facebook and Instagram algorithm because it rewards bad behavior. I mean, there was a whole thing on it. If you're familiar with Yuval Noah Harari, really excellent author. He became well known, I think, when he wrote the book Sapiens, but his most recent one is Nexus and how information shapes society. And he talks about the Facebook algorithm, and it was designed just for viewer retention. And the algorithm found out that what kept people on the platform was content that spreads hate and emotionally charges people. So why do people make post about how they don't like this person and that person sucks? Because it charges an emotional response, and we all feed into it by commenting. So if we stop doing that and we actually care about what's best for the dogs and try to learn from each other, I think that's how we can improve the community. That's just coming from my perspective.
Here's another question from KR Labradoodles. I can only believe that they have a Labradoodle. Yeah. Can a service dog be a good trained? Can a service dog also be trained to be a protection dog? That's a really good question.
I think technically it's allowed, but it's not recommended. So a lot of trainers that train service dogs, because you think about it, what is the responsibility of a protection dog and what's the responsibility of a service dog? So if you want to be cool and be like, yeah, I got my protection dog. Now, if the service is protection, so let me be clear on this, because I've had lots of clients with PTSD and they teach the dog to like block the front of their body, block the back of their body, just to keep people away. That's not really a protection dog. That's a behavior that's creating a barrier. But if we think about a responsibility of service dog, the service dog is to focus on their human and to make sure they're there to provide the services that they've been trained to based on that person's disability. A protection dog is supposed to perceive threat. Okay, what are they focused on? Right. Yeah. So I think technically it can be, I think it can be allowed, but I think it's frowned upon. I don't think service dog trainers that primarily train service dogs would recommend it. So can you do it? I believe so. Is it recommended? No.
Yeah, service dogs to me is and I don't know too many service dogs personally, because it's all I've seen is they throwing vest on there and saying service dog, right? So I don't know the level of service dog that training that dog has had. I know they're not supposed to be responsive towards other dogs that are untrained. They're supposed to actually, comfort and aid the actual owner helper. So yeah, that makes a lot of difference, because protection dogs, they're taught to respond to a reaction or to words or to sudden movement. There's another question right here. This is a good one.
Respond to the environment.
It says, Tech Anon V9R, you've interviewed tons of world-renowned trainers, and I know you know tons of them, and did the Tom Rose School. So do you think it would actually be valuable to create a vetted certificate cert standard for dog trainers?
That's another really good question. And I think it's very complex because it is an unregulated industry. So it would certainly create issues with a lot of people in the industry. It would probably do some good, and it would probably also cause some problems. It's such a complex question, because there are times where I see things that people who are, in quotes, professional trainers, and I'm seeing what they're doing. I'm like, no, they should not be a professional trainer. And a big problem with that, and sure, someone could say that about me too, but a big problem with that is the authority biased, right? So it's a psychological term. Someone is the authority. And so if they tell you something, you're going to listen to them. Well, what's the big problem with dog training? Well, there's so many different opinions. And then how do you decide what is the actual authority voice, the big voice that's going to encompass all of dog training? I'll give you a really good example. This is something I saw recently. A dog trainer, and this is something that drives me nuts too, but they took a screenshot of a private conversation that they had with, I can only imagine, a client. And the client did not, you can tell from the message. Now, the person blacked out the name, so you can't tell who it was, but still, private conversation. I don't know. I just find that unprofessional. But the person, you can tell, was clearly in a position where they did not want to correct their puppy. So they had a puppy and they were going through one of the most common problems that everyone has, puppy biting. Why? Because they teeth. My 9-month-old is like teething right now. My human 9-month-old. It's like, it's a part of development. So this person was like, can I redirect it? Can I give the puppy a toy? Can I do this? And the trainer said, no, you must punish it. If you want to stop the behavior, it must be punished. And then I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, I've raised dozens of dogs, personally imprinted dozens of dogs, and all the dogs that I've raised, not clients' dogs, but the dogs that I raised, I never correct puppy biting ever. And every single time it goes away after the puppy is done teething. Now, this is the rule, not the exception. Sure, there might be a case where the puppy continues to bite beyond that, but most are just going to stop. So the point that I'm making is, how do we decide what is fair, what is correct? How do we enforce it? Who gets to do the certification? Good things can come from it. Bad things can come from it. I think it would be nice if there was some kind of regulation though. So I'll give you another extreme example. I had this client, this was years ago. The dog's name was Cowboy. I still remember the dog. And the client reached out to me when the dog was at 2 years of age. So full maturity. It was an American bulldog. The dog looked like the dog Chase from Homeward Bound, but on steroids. Like the dog was jacked. And I get there and she told me that she had hired a trainer when the dog was 8 weeks old. And the trainer came down, saw the dog and said, this dog needs to be euthanized. I'm not working with this dog. So the lady who owned the dog, 8 weeks old. Yeah. The trainer was garbage. I looked up the trainer and she was basically using dog training to promote her rock band. She knew nothing about training. And I even contacted her and I said, do you do a consultation? And she says, no, but I guarantee my work. I could have laughed at her. But so this person goes, I hired a professional. The professional couldn't deal with it. There's no solution. So when people are in that situation, now some people, they're smart enough to say, okay, maybe that trainer wasn't that good and they hire another trainer. Every dog trainer that's listening to this has had clients that has hired multiple trainers before them. It's very, very common. But some people go, I tried, this dog's unfixable. Where does the dog end up? In the shelter. The dog ends up getting euthanized because someone who was claiming to be something they weren't. I know the saying, fake it till you make it. Well, you also have to actually be able to do it. We're not talking about scamming people here. So that's where I see the big issue is when there is no regulation. Anyone can get a business card here. I'm a dog trainer. I watched 5 YouTube videos. Give me your dog and I'm going to make it perfect. In fact, when I was at the Tom Rose School, we had a lot of trainers that came down from big box companies that they worked at these big box company pet stores. And they told us that their training was 2 weeks. From someone else's training was 2 weeks, from someone else's training who was 2 weeks. And they were told that they don't know the answer to make it up. They were literally told that. So people are going to these people who are supposed experts and they're making up things because that's what they were told to do. And this is where we see the problems. And it's something when I mentor trainers, because I'm still learning. I mean, dog training's simple, but it's also insanely complex. If you really start looking at, like, we start talking about emotions driving behaviors, but behaviors affect emotions. Is this being motivated by something external, internal? What chemicals are being released in the dog's brain? Incredibly complicated. So you can study it for a long time, but it can also be very simple on the surface. Make the dog sit, give him a treat, do it a bunch of times, positive reinforcement, randomize the rewards. Okay, great. So, man, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. It's getting late for me and I got ADHD.
No. Listen, we got to do this again, Nate. I'm not gonna lie to you. This was very, very informative.
This was fun.
We got to do it earlier, though.
I know, it's my bedtime.
Yeah, I know. We talked about that. Hey, guys, I want to say I really appreciate. I'm gonna call you Mr. Schoemer. You deserve that.
Thank you, sir.
I want to thank Mr. Schoemer for coming on to the show. If you guys notice, I've had a ticker on the bottom where you can follow him on Instagram and YouTube, but that's not the only place you can find him, because he's got one thing that I've been preaching to you guys, and that is a website. Nate, can you tell the people where they can find you?
I really appreciate that. It's nateschoemer.com. I'm actually updating the website right now. And if they do want to read some more research, I know I mentioned Michael Ellis. I recently wrote an article on him. If you haven't had him on the show, you got to have him on the show. The article is really great. It breaks down the big picture of dog training. And so because I'm such a fan of his work, when I watched his most recent course on Sit, Stay, Learn, I thought I need to write an article on this. I think it's going to help people who are trying to navigate through all the BS that we find online to see what actually works and what holds true to the science. But I do have a few articles on there. The YouTube, as you mentioned, I wouldn't mind doing another Animal Planet show in the future. So if you guys want to go watch Rescue Dog to Super Dog, give them some more ratings. Maybe they'll reach back out to me. I also do seminars. So I have a couple scheduled this year. I have one in Arizona this month, and then one in Oregon the following month, one in Texas, I believe in September. And we're going to be trying to add some more. So if anyone wants to train with me in person, I'd love to train with them. And again, really appreciate you having me on, and everyone else who sat and listened to us talk about this obsession and passion of ours. I hope it was valuable because I really enjoyed myself.
Nate, I want to say thanks again, everybody, for tuning in, whatever part of the region you're listening and watching. Thanks for giving us the time. We did go over. Remember, we said 59 minutes. Yeah. I was like, no, if the conversation is good, the conversation is good. Yeah.
Well, that was my fault. I said, let's do some of the questions.
That's great. This was your time, because, like I said, it's an honor for me to have you on here. I want to say, people, thanks for tuning in. And as I always tell you guys, after every podcast, every interview, every episode, stay resilient, but be responsible. Until next time.